I'm Mick North, and I'm recording this at my home in Scotland in the UK. 3 years ago, I had the privilege of choosing the winners of the Americans Against Gun Violence High School Essay Contest. It was a pleasure to have been invited to do so again for this year's competition. Reading the finalist essays was, as before, a special experience, but also a very emotional one, and I'd like to share a few thoughts with you. Earlier this month, a friend told me about a conversation she'd had with a local woman during a recent visit to Florida. They were both moms with young children, and she recalled how the conversation had turned to their children's schooling. My friend had been intrigued when she heard that the other person's children were being homeschooled, but was then shocked to learn why. It was not because of shortcomings in the local education system, or because the parents thought they could do a better job themselves. It was because, in today's USA, this American mom believed that school was too dangerous a place for a child to be. Her reason, the prevalence of school shootings. Such a view would be alien to a British parent. 27 years ago, Britain did have to deal with the trauma of a school shooting. It happened in March 1996 at an elementary school in Dunblane, a small town in central Scotland. A man armed with 4 legally owned handguns entered the school gym and shot dead a teacher and 16 5- and 6-year-olds, injured many other victims, and then killed himself. One of those who died that day was my only daughter Sophie, then aged 5. Almost immediately, my country took steps to minimise the risk of this happening again, and there has never been another shooting in a school in Britain. Our schools are safe. And this was achieved not through arming school staff or introducing other draconian security measures, nor by exposing students to the ordeal of frequent lockdown drills. It was accomplished by eliminating the opportunity for would-be perpetrators to arm themselves with lethal weapons. In other words, by tightening controls over guns. Following Sophie's death, I, along with many others, became involved in campaigning for tighter gun controls in Britain. In a message that I recorded previously for Americans Against Gun Violence, I explained as follows what was achieved. Even in 1996, the reasons a person could own a gun in Britain were limited. For example, self-defense wasn't considered a legitimate one. Nevertheless, it was relatively easy to buy and keep multi-shot handguns simply by expressing a wish to do target shooting. We succeeded in changing that and made our country safer. Following pressure from the victims' families, from much of the media, from many honourable politicians, and from campaigning members of the public, successive British governments tightened our gun legislation, so much so that the private ownership of handguns was banned completely. Dunblane was a one-off school shooting here, but such events have since become sickeningly more frequent in America. And we should not forget that more people are murdered with guns on an average day in the USA than die in gun homicides throughout a whole year here. Whilst many questions were raised about improving security in Britain's schools after what happened in Dunblane, and some significant changes were certainly made afterwards, nobody in Britain had any desire to respond to the tragedy by turning schools into fortresses. Why bring arms into schools, even in the hands of security staff, when what could and should be done is minimising the opportunity for any would-be perpetrator to be armed? The changes made here made sure that guns were no longer easy to obtain. The means of carrying out a shooting in a school, a place of work, a nightclub, a movie theatre, indeed anywhere, have been significantly reduced, something that's apparent from Britain's low gun crime statistics. After Sophie died, my predominant question was always, what if the perpetrator had not been able to get his guns. Never once did I think, what if they'd been armed guards? Nor, what if they'd practiced lockdown drills? Lockdown drills were the topic in this year's essay contest. The students were asked to write about their thoughts on lockdown drills in response to the threat of shootings on school campuses. I was very interested to hear the views of these young people who are growing up in a society where firearms are not kept under tight control and where gun violence is prevalent. What they had to say did not make for comfortable reading. To my mind, and judging from what they had to say in their essays, to the mind of the students too, their experience of school is being distorted by the impact these drills are having on their lives and education. This group of young Americans has many questions to ask about why teaching students how to evade a school shooter should ever have become part of a normal school life. The contestants question its actual effectiveness in keeping them and their fellow students safe. Many of them view the lockdown drills as a distraction from the real problem, the easy availability of guns and the failure of the USA to deal appropriately with this. Certain themes recurred in a majority of the essays. The drills have been a constant feature of the students' school lives. They often dwelt on previous and recent school shootings at other schools and how the commonplace nature of lockdown drills reflects the unacceptable level of gun violence in the USA. The need for stronger gun laws and the writers' frustration at a lack of action were frequently discussed. They described their personal experiences of being scared and angry. Often there was an air of desperation in their words. Some of the first-hand accounts of drills were chilling. The essays also highlighted the futile nature of the drills. No, a lockdown won't help us, exhorted one entrant. The heightened fear and anxiety they add to school life, and the probability that the exercises could actually inform would-be perpetrators, shooters who become familiarized with the places they might terrorize and who aren't going to be stopped by darkened rooms and drawn blinds. Students want more, not least a safe place to learn and grow. America, wrote one of the students, is doing a horrendous job at protecting its youngest. The top 3 essays included many of these points and added more. The third prize went to a student whose essay looked back to an earlier era and made pertinent comparisons between duck and cover, a so-called solution of the 1950s and 1960s to survive nuclear war, with locks, lights, out of sight, the solution currently enacted to survive a shooter. The writer finds the similarities alarming, both being of questionable value, but each adding to the culture of fear and normalising the status quo. The second place essay emphasised the absurdity of the situation in the lockdown drill. Active shooter drills are a band-aid solution. The only true way to end school shootings is through the inaction of stricter gun control legislation. The arguments were supported by data on the prevalence of legal weapons used in mass shootings. In the final sentence, the student proposed the locking down of assault weapons or the locking down of the process of purchasing a gun instead of locking down students. The winning essay, entitled A Typical Day in America, was a well thought out piece focusing on the thoughts experienced during a lockdown drill, thoughts about your location, thoughts about how exposed you might be, thoughts about other shootings, thoughts about the interpretation of the Second Amendment, thoughts about those representatives and senators who don't have to be in this situation, thoughts about their tacit acceptance. This shouldn't be a typical day in America. You think about living in a country where none of this is necessary, the student wrote. Then, why is this our normal? Before poignantly ending with, "Maybe you can't bear the answer." The essay should be a must-read for anyone who thinks lockdown drills provide any kind of reassurance to students or a solution to Americans' gun violence problem. This year, a record number of over 1,100 essays were submitted, many of a very high standard. In addition to the top 3 and a further 9 main prize winners, another 30 entrants will be receiving a well-deserved prize. As always, I'd like to congratulate all the winners and applaud each and every one of the high school students who entered the contest. I've often described how, whenever I heard about a school shooting in the USA, and especially during the years immediately following Dunblane, I assumed it wouldn't take long for America to recognise how change for the better could be achieved by following our example. It didn't happen. Yet reading what the students have to say has, as before, given me hope that there's now a young generation who, no doubt in part through their frequent exposure to lockdown drills, have a much more acute awareness and appreciation of the problem, and more so than many of their elders and so-called betters. Their school lives have been overshadowed by these drills, by these constant reminders of the damage that the prevalence of guns can cause. No doubt they will all be hoping for urgent and significant changes so that their own children's school lives won't be equally impacted. In 2020, I was due to visit the USA to give talks organised by Americans Against Gun Violence, in which I would highlight Britain's positive and decisive reaction to our one and only school shooting. Sadly, the COVID pandemic put paid to that trip. However, I'm delighted to say that in October, I will be travelling to California, where I'll be looking forward to speaking to an American audience about the actions taken here over a quarter of a century ago, which helped ensure that British schools are a safe environment for our children. With tighter controls, there should never be a need to disrupt and disturb children's schooling with anxiety-inducing lockdown drills in any country. Thank you.